Once hailed as the First Lady of the Paranormal, Yvette Fielding brought ghosts and haunted houses into millions of living rooms. With Most Haunted, she carved her name into TV history, blending drama, fear, and curiosity into a cult classic. But behind the cameras, Yvette's story was not one of glamour or unshakable success. At 56 years old, her life tells a very different tale, one of controversy, personal heartbreak, financial strain, and a fading legacy. Tonight, we uncover the tragic truth of Yvette Fielding and how the woman who once owned the paranormal spotlight is now struggling in ways few could have predicted. Long before she became associated with haunted houses, spirit possessions, and late-night ghost hunts, Yvette Fielding was the smiling, youthful face of British television. Born in Stockport, Cheshire, in 1968, she grew up with dreams of stardom. By the time she was a teenager, she was already making her way into the entertainment industry, quickly catching the eye of producers who saw her as energetic, wholesome, and marketable. At just 18 years old, she was given the opportunity of a lifetime, joining the legendary children's program Blue Peter in 1987. It was a groundbreaking moment. Yvette wasn't just another presenter, she became the youngest host in the history of the show. Audiences warmed to her instantly, and she quickly became a household name. On Blue Peter, she did everything from adventurous stunts to educational segments, all while maintaining a cheerful, approachable personality that made her a role model for children across the UK. Parents trusted her, kids adored her, and critics predicted a long, successful career ahead. But with that fame came pressure. Unlike most 18-year-olds, who were free to make mistakes out of the public eye, Yvette was scrutinized by millions. Every word, every expression, every slip-up was broadcast and judged. She was thrust into an adult world where the demands of television left little room for the carefree life of a normal teenager. The image she projected was one of polished confidence, but behind the scenes, she was learning quickly how ruthless the media industry could be. When she eventually left Blue Peter after 5 years, Yvette had already built a reputation as one of the rising stars of British broadcasting. Yet she also carried with her the weight of being typecast. Having been defined so strongly as a children's presenter, she struggled to find roles that allowed her to grow up in the eyes of the public. What had seemed like the perfect beginning carried within it the seeds of frustration, and it wouldn't be long before her career would take a darker, stranger turn. After her early success on Blue Peter, Yvette Fielding faced the daunting challenge of reinventing herself. The industry remembered her as the bright, youthful presenter of children's television, and breaking out of that mold proved far more difficult than she imagined. She dabbled in various projects, guest appearances, smaller presenting roles, but nothing seemed to give her the same cultural impact as her time on Blue Peter. For a while, her career drifted, caught between nostalgia for her past and uncertainty about her future. It was during this period that she began working closely with her husband, producer Carl Beatty. Together, they would conceive of an idea that would change not only her career, but also the landscape of paranormal television. In 2002, Most Haunted debuted on Living TV, a network known for niche programming. At first, the show seemed like a gamble. Would audiences really tune in to watch a team of investigators wandering through dark buildings with cameras and psychics in tow? But the gamble paid off. Most Haunted quickly grew into a phenomenon, tapping into the early 2000s fascination with ghosts, the supernatural, and reality TV. Unlike earlier paranormal documentaries, it leaned heavily into drama, live broadcasts, and the unpredictability of psychic mediums like Derek Acorah. Yvette became the face of the series, guiding viewers through abandoned mansions, historic castles, and supposedly cursed locations. Her reactions, gasps, screams, nervous laughter, became as iconic as the alleged ghostly activity itself. For a time, Yvette thrived. She was no longer the wholesome children's presenter. She was now the fearless host walking into the dark on behalf of her audience. She had successfully transformed her image and captured a new generation of fans. Yet even as the show rose in popularity, whispers began. Was it real? Was it staged? And how much of what viewers saw was authentic paranormal activity? And how much was manufactured drama? Those questions would eventually haunt Yvette just as much as the spirits she claimed to chase. planting the seeds for a controversy that would follow her for the rest of her career. When Most Haunted first hit television screens in 2002, few expected it to become the cultural juggernaut it eventually was. The premise was simple: gather a team of investigators, a psychic medium, and a crew, then lock them overnight inside some of Britain's most allegedly haunted locations. But under Yvette Fielding's steady hand as host, the show quickly became more than just a spooky curiosity. It became must-watch TV. Audiences tuned in not only for the ghosts, but for Yvette herself. She played the perfect surrogate for the viewer. Nervous but brave, skeptical, yet willing to believe, shrieking one moment and pushing forward into the darkness the next. She was relatable in a way few hosts were, grounding the chaos around her. Whether it was a door slamming, a strange noise echoing down a corridor, or Derek Acorah suddenly claiming he was possessed by a restless spirit, Yvette's reactions became legendary. The early 2000s were fertile ground for paranormal programming. America had Ghost Hunters, Britain had Most Haunted, but Yvette's show offered something rawer, more unpredictable. The live specials became events in themselves, where fans gathered to watch possessions, seances, and sudden bursts of activity play out in real time. For younger audiences, it was terrifying. For older ones, it was nostalgic, hearkening back to ghost stories and legends of their youth. The show gained an international following, even airing in the United States, where Yvette became something of a cult figure. Merchandising deals, spin-offs, and books followed, all reinforcing her position as the First Lady of the Paranormal. For a while, it seemed like she had completely rebranded herself from children's TV presenter to paranormal icon. Yet success brought with it skepticism. Critics questioned the legitimacy of the footage, and whispers of fakery began circulating. For a show built on trust, that audiences were watching something authentic, those whispers posed a serious threat. At the center of it all stood Yvette, caught between her duty as host and the creeping suspicion that not everything in her empire was what it seemed. The defining scandal that would come to overshadow Yvette's legacy on Most Haunted revolved around one of the show's most flamboyant personalities, psychic medium Derek Acorah. Acorah was a natural entertainer. With his animated mannerisms and his ever-present spirit guide, Sam, he seemed to embody the very heart of the supernatural world. But his frequent possessions, where he would suddenly change voice and mannerisms, allegedly overtaken by a spirit, began to draw suspicion, even from within the crew. Enter Dr. Kieran O'Keefe, a parapsychologist brought onto the show as its scientific counterbalance. O'Keefe, skeptical of Acorah from the start, decided to test him. He reportedly fed Derek false information about a fictional spirit named Creed Kaffer, an anagram for Derek Faker. Sure enough, on camera, Acorah appeared to channel this made-up entity. For O'Keefe, it was proof that Derek was either consciously or unconsciously fabricating his performances. For audiences, it was explosive. News outlets seized on the story, declaring Derek Acorah exposed as a fraud. And where did that leave Yvette? As the face of the show, she was suddenly entangled in controversy she couldn't escape. Rumors circulated of her privately dismissing Derek's possessions, with alleged leaked recordings suggesting she didn't believe in them herself. Fans who once saw Most Haunted as the pinnacle of paranormal investigation now began to question if it had all been staged. The fallout was immense. Derek eventually left the show, but the damage was done. The scandal didn't just hurt him, it cast a long shadow over Yvette as well. Even though she hadn't been the one caught pretending, she was accused of knowingly keeping him on screen despite doubts about his authenticity. Some praised her for allowing the scientific perspective of O'Keefe to be part of the narrative, but others felt betrayed, believing she had prioritized ratings over truth. For Yvette, this was a turning point. Most Haunted continued, but the credibility it once enjoyed was permanently fractured. Instead of being remembered as groundbreaking television, the show became synonymous with controversy. And Yvette, who had once stood at the peak of cult status, began her slow descent into a career defined more by scandal than success. After the Derek Acorah scandal shook Most Haunted, Yvette Fielding tried to steady the ship. The show continued, cycling through new mediums, investigators, and live specials. But something had shifted. The aura of credibility was gone. Audiences who once tuned in religiously began to view the program with suspicion. Every shadow, every spirit voice, every sudden possession was scrutinized as potential fakery. And without the element of belief, the fear that made Most Haunted so gripping began to fade. Meanwhile, the paranormal television landscape was evolving. In the United States, ghost hunters grew into a massive franchise, offering a more grounded, technical approach. A few years later, Ghost Adventures with Zach Bagans burst onto the scene, blending investigative techniques with big personalities and cinematic flair. Compared to these fresher, more dynamic productions, Most Haunted looked increasingly dated. What once felt raw and edgy now felt repetitive. The shaky cameras, the night vision shots, the endless screams, it no longer carried the same punch. Yvette tried to adapt. She and her husband Carl launched spin-offs, produced live events, and experimented with revivals. But none of them captured the magic of the early years. Each attempt seemed to highlight the decline, rather than reverse it. Viewers who once considered Yvette the face of paranormal television began to drift to other shows. Her name, once synonymous with fear and suspense, was now overshadowed by newer personalities who had learned from Most Haunted's success and its mistakes. By the mid-2000s, Yvette's career had slowed to a crawl. She made occasional television appearances and continued producing paranormal content, but the cult status she had once enjoyed was gone. Instead, she was remembered primarily for the controversies that dogged her biggest creation. For someone who had been one of the youngest stars of Blue Peter and later reinvented herself as a pioneer of paranormal TV, this was a painful fall. What should have been a legacy of innovation and daring had become, in the eyes of many, a cautionary tale about how quickly credibility can vanish in the entertainment industry. Behind the scenes, Yvette's struggles weren't limited to declining ratings. Running Most Haunted and its spin-offs had always been a massive financial undertaking, and as viewership fell, so did the stability of the companies behind it. Reports of financial issues linked to production companies tied to Yvette and her husband Carl began to circulate. Legal disputes, debt, and accusations of mismanagement painted a grim picture of the business side of her empire. For Yvette, the stress was immense. Once celebrated as a trailblazer, she now found herself fighting to keep projects afloat while critics circled. The pressure strained not only her finances, but also her personal life. Though she and Carl remained a partnership in both business and marriage, the weight of keeping their brand alive placed them under constant scrutiny. Every attempt to revive Most Haunted came with questions. Was it genuine passion or a desperate bid to stay relevant and solvent? Adding to the difficulty was the public's shifting perception of her. Fans who had once adored her now questioned her motives. Some accused her of knowingly keeping questionable mediums on screen for the sake of ratings. Others dismissed her as someone who had leaned too heavily on manufactured drama. For someone who had once been trusted implicitly by British families on Blue Peter, these accusations were crushing. Financially, she had to scale back. Gone were the days of lavish productions and international distribution deals. By her mid-50s, Yvette was living with the legacy of decisions that had seemed like bold risks at the time, but now looked like costly mistakes. The financial security she might have expected after decades in television wasn't there. Instead, she was left trying to salvage a career defined as much by scandal as by success. In many ways, this was the cruelest twist of all. Yvette had once embodied the dream of British television, a child star who grew into a household name, who reinvented herself and built an empire. But now, at 56, she faced the harsh reality of what happens when an empire built on fear and spectacle collapses. The tragedies weren't just on the screen anymore. They were woven into her life behind the scenes. As the years went on, Yvette Fielding's reputation shifted from being the pioneering face of paranormal television to a figure associated with controversy and distrust. What had once been admiration for her bravery on screen began to fade, replaced by cynicism about the authenticity of her work. Colleagues and fans alike started to distance themselves, leaving Yvette increasingly isolated within an industry that had once celebrated her. Part of the damage came from the never-ending question of authenticity. Viewers who had grown up on Most Haunted remembered the nights of live broadcasts where Derek Acorah claimed possession or where shadows darted across the screen. But after O'Keefe's revelation about Derek being fed false information, many began to see the show as less of an investigation and more of a performance. And because Yvette was the face of the program, the criticism inevitably fell hardest on her shoulders. Even when she insisted she was simply presenting what unfolded, skeptics argued she had a responsibility to protect her audience from deception. Within paranormal circles, Most Haunted lost credibility. Groups of independent ghost hunters mocked the program as staged drama. Even those who believed in the supernatural turned on Yvette, saying she had turned serious investigation into sensationalized television that embarrassed the field. For a woman who had spent years building her brand on authenticity and intensity, this was a devastating blow. As her professional circle shrank, so too did her visibility. While Zach Bagans in America became the new global face of paranormal TV, Yvette became a figure tied to a specific era, respected by some for starting the genre's boom, but often dismissed as outdated and discredited. Friends and former colleagues described her as more withdrawn, focusing on family and smaller projects, while the industry she helped shape moved on without her. By her mid-50s, Yvette was no longer the fearless leader charging into haunted halls with cameras rolling. Instead, she was remembered as the host of a show many accused of faking its scares. Her credibility damaged beyond repair. Isolation had replaced fame, and the trust she once commanded from millions had dissolved into doubt. If Yvette's reputation had already been fragile, the resurfacing of a supposed secret recording only made things worse. In the clip, circulated online and dissected by paranormal enthusiasts, a voice alleged to be Yvette's can be heard making damning remarks about Derek Acorah, calling his possessions fake and admitting that she didn't believe in them. The grainy audio, whether authentic or doctored, was enough to reignite old controversies that had never truly gone away. The clip spread quickly, with fans and skeptics alike debating its legitimacy. Supporters argued that it might have been edited or taken out of context. After all, Yvette herself never appeared on camera during the segment, leaving plenty of room for doubt. But perception often matters more than truth, and in the public eye, it looked like confirmation of what critics had always said, that Most Haunted was staged, and that Yvette knew it all along. The timing of the recording's resurgence was especially cruel. By then, Yvette was already struggling to maintain relevance, and this scandal reopened old wounds at the very moment she was trying to preserve her legacy. The accusations made her look complicit, as though she had allowed audiences to be deceived for years just to keep her program alive, even if she had privately doubted certain elements of the show. Airing those doubts in such a way cast her not as a brave whistleblower, but as someone who lacked integrity. Paranormal fans debated furiously, but the damage was done. For many, the clip became the final nail in the coffin of her credibility. It suggested that even the host of Britain's most famous paranormal series didn't believe in the phenomena her career was built on. Yvette's silence on the matter only deepened the mystery. Without a clear denial, speculation thrived. What should have been a chance to enjoy the legacy of her work turned instead into another controversy that kept her tied to scandal. The shadow of Derek Acorah, long since departed, still haunted her career. And at 56, Yvette found herself caught between defending her reputation and retreating from a public that no longer seemed to trust her. In interviews, Yvette has occasionally spoken about the toll fame has taken on her. Years of scrutiny, relentless schedules, and the weight of running a television brand left her burned out. The controversies surrounding Most Haunted only deepened that exhaustion. Though she still makes appearances and dabbles in media work, she is no longer a household name. The woman who once commanded late-night TV slots now slips in and out of public view. Her legacy debated more in forums and YouTube breakdowns than in mainstream press. The tragedy of Yvette's life at 56 is not that she faded from television, that happens to many celebrities, but that her exit was marred by distrust. The very fans who had once screamed at their screens during her ghost hunts began to question whether she believed in any of it herself. The secret recordings, the Derek Acorah scandal, the endless debates about staged moments, all of it eroded the foundation she built her career on. Trust, once lost, is nearly impossible to win back. Financially, she has faced hardships that further complicate her story. Running production companies tied to Most Haunted brought with it debt, disputes, and instability. What looked like a TV empire on the outside was often chaotic behind the scenes. Instead of enjoying financial security in her 50s, Yvette found herself navigating the fallout of years spent trying to keep a brand alive. Today, Yvette lives in a strange limbo. For some, she remains a cult icon, the fearless host who brought ghosts into living rooms and inspired a generation of paranormal enthusiasts. For others, she is a cautionary tale, a reminder that credibility can crumble overnight and that building a career on fear and spectacle often comes with consequences. At 56, Yvette Fielding's life is tragic not because she failed to achieve success, but because she achieved it, only to watch it unravel. The legacy she leaves behind is one of both influence and controversy, forever marked by the question, was it all real or was it all just television?